Oh, is it Ruby you're referring to? Rose replied, yes, she looks a lot like your daughter. Tony said, yes, ooh, she's my daughter's friend. I don't know where the resemblance came from. I was even surprised myself. Rose replied, so why did she stay for the night here? Lola inquired. It's a very long story, Rose replied. Every story must start from somewhere, so start from that somewhere, Lola pestered on. Okay, let me tell you guys since you're insisting. Rose started to narrate everything, exactly the way Ruby told her. This world is wicked, Lola said when Rose had finished her story. Seriously wicked, Rose retorted. I wonder who they really wanted, Tony put in. We just have to be very careful. In everything we do, the rest, we leave it for God, Rose said, sighing. Let's get to the car. The kids are already waiting, Rose said as they all stood up to go outside. They entered the car. Rose told Ruby to stay on the seat adjacent the driver's seat so she could give the directions well. The car was a Toyota Sienna Chrysler Pacifica model, so they were able to fit inside without any problem, and it was Mike's favorite, so Rose knew she had to be extra careful with it. Then they hit the road. 20 minutes later, they arrived at Ajao Estate. Yes, that's my house, the one painted red and yellow, Ruby shouted ecstatically. Okay, let me park the car well, Rose said as she entered into the gate. So we're here, you guys can get down, Rose said. Would you guys stay in the car while I go get familiar with Ruby's mother, or would you like to join me? Rose asked her friends as she was stepping out of the car. No, don't worry, we're good here, they replied. Are you sure? Rose asked once more. Don't worry, we're more than okay. You can go and get your business done. We'll wait here for you, they said. Okay, if you insist. I won't waste much time, Rose said as she got out of the car finally. She moved towards the building. It was a one-story, painted with deep red and yellow ochre, she noticed. She noticed that all the houses in the estate looked alike. It was a quiet place. All the same, the house was beautiful. Ruby had already jumped out of the car before anyone else and ran to ring their doorbell. Yes, who is it? Mrs. Alade's voice was heard asking from inside the house. Mummy, it's me, Ruby. Open the door, Ruby said. Am I dreaming? Mrs. Alade thought to herself. I must still be asleep. Ruby, that was missing yesterday, came by herself today. She was very happy. Happy was an understatement. But she was still going to spank her if she found out that Ruby went somewhere on her own accord, she thought. She opened the door. Lo and behold, Ruby was standing in front of her. She carried her up and hugged her. Mrs. Alade was so happy. Then she noticed the other little girl of the same age who stood near Ruby. That was when her attention was brought to the woman who stood behind both of them. The woman's face screamed shock. Mom, how? When did you start living here? Rose asked, all these simultaneously, still in shock. Mrs. Alade was in great surprise as well. She couldn't believe her eyes. Her daughter, that she hasn't seen in about 8 years, was standing right in front of her, on her doorstep. She was happy, annoyed and surprised at the same time. Happy that she was seeing her daughter, annoyed about how Rose suddenly cut off contact, although she knew Rose had a good reason, and surprised because anyone would be in this situation. They hugged each other. Mum, do you know each other? Ruby asked. Mummy, why did you call Ruby's mother your mum? Sarah asked. Sarah, it's a long story. You people should enter into the house, or do you want to stand outside all day long? Mrs. Alade said, ushering them into the house. Inside the house was painted white with oil paint. It had a nice piece of furniture set. The chairs were a mixture of cayenne and pink. A glass table sat on top of a well-embroidered mat in the center of the living room. This house is nice, Rose said as she sat down on the sofa. Thank you, her mother replied. Ruby, show your friend around the house, then the both of you can go and play in your room, Mrs. Alade said to Ruby. Yes, Mummy, Ruby shouted as she zoomed off with Sarah. Mum, you really have a long story to tell, so just start from the beginning, Rose said to her mother. Immediately, Ruby and Sarah were out of sight. First of all, how have you been? What of that husband of yours? Is that my granddaughter? Ma, I have been doing well, though it's not that easy, Rose said as she hung her head. What do you mean it's not that easy? Her mother asked. Mommy, that's a story for another day. Tell me about you first of all. How did Ruby come about? Rose asked in enthusiasm. Since you cut off all contact with me, I couldn't stay alone with no one to take care of, so I adopted Ruby to at least keep me company. Keep the house lively, you know, Mrs. Alade said sadly. Mum, I'm so sorry. It's my husband. I know. You don't need to explain. No, Mummy. The least I can do is to apologize, so let me… Okay, if you insist. As I was saying, it's my husband's fault. I wouldn't just wake up and decide not to speak to you again, Mummy. I'm so sorry. Rose apologized. It's okay. It's all right. I already knew. No matter what, I still love you. You're still my daughter. Mummy, thank you. From now, I'll endeavor to visit. At least I know your new address, so it won't be difficult for me to visit every now and then. And I'll be coming with your granddaughter. Her name is Sarah. You guys would get to know each other better, Rose said happily. If it would be detrimental to your marriage, don't do it. Mum, I choose to do it. Moreover, my husband wouldn't know about it. He goes to work early in the morning and comes back the least 8 p.m., so I can take a sneak without him knowing about it. Only if it's okay with you, Rose said. It's totally okay with me, only if it won't cause any harm to your marriage. Which mother won't want her daughter visiting? Mrs. Alade replied. Okay, Mum, I think it's time for me to be on my way. I came with my friends. They're waiting in the car and I told them that I won't be long. Yes, let me call the girls downstairs so Sarah can go. Ruby, come downstairs with Sarah, Mrs. Alade shouted. Okay, Mummy, we're coming down, Ruby shouted back in reply. Sarah, let's be on our way, Rose said immediately the girls came downstairs. But Mummy, I don't want to go, Sarah sobbed. Both Rose and Mrs. Alade started to chuckle. They're really close, Mrs. Alade commented. Yea, they are, Rose said in affirmation. I guess there's nothing I can do. You can stay and I'll come pick you up in the evening, if it's okay with you, Rose said, facing Mrs. Alade. Hey, it's totally okay with me. She can stay all she wants, Mrs. Alade replied. Thank you, Ruby and Sarah said happily in unison as they both ran up the stairs, leaving Rose and her mother. So, it's time for me to go. I'll be back in the evening, bye. Bye, my dear, Mrs. Alade said as she shut the door. Rose walked back to her car with radiating happiness. She reached the car and opened the driver's door. Whoa, what happened? You took almost forever, Tony said immediately. Rose got into the car. Have you noticed how she's smiling? Are you sure it wasn't Ruby's single father she met in there? Lola said teasingly. Hey guys, please, I'm a married woman, and it was nothing of that sort, Rose said, laughing Lola's joke off. Married woman Kay, please, if you see an opportunity, take it. Your husband is unworthy of your faithfulness, Tony commented. Hey Tony, you've gone too far now, Lola said as Rose eyed her. By this time they were already on the road, on the way to a spa to have the time of their lives. So Rose, you said it was something entirely different. What was it? Lola asked. My dear, it's a complicated story, Rose said, shaking her head. Then uncomplicate it now, Tony said, as she was eager to hear what kept Rose that long. Elle met my mother, Rose said. Met your mother how? Do you even have a mother? Why haven't we heard of her before? You never talk about her. Did you plan to meet her there, or was it just a coincidence? Please tell us more. Both Tony and Lola threw barrages of questions at Rose. Hey, how many questions at a time? Allow me, please, Rose said. We're not allowing you. We're your friends, so tell us everything, Tony said. Okay, let me start from the beginning. Rose told them about how her husband, Mike, coerced her into cutting contact with her mother. How he said she was a negative influence to her, and he wouldn't want to see her around their house. This your husband goes too far. It's not fair. So you haven't seen your mother in almost 8 years now, Tony said. Yes, you're right. She wasn't even there to help when I was dealing with my miscarriages. She wasn't there when Sarah was born. I had to do everything with the help of a maid. Yeah, so how is she connected to Ruby? Lola asked. Rose told them everything. Whoa, that's a lot to take in, Lola commented. There's some serious drama going on in your family, Tony said. My friends, please let's cheer up. Let this story not change our mood. Today is meant to be a fun day. Remember our plans, Rose said teasingly. Yes, let's do this. Let's have fun, both Lola and Tony shouted. Amy was crying as she left her brother-in-law's house. She had come there 6 days in a row after the day he told her to return for a feedback. The responses were always the same. It was either he wasn't around or he was busy, flimsy excuses they gave. It would have been better if they had told her that they didn't want to help, instead of making her come day after day for a futile journey. She knew he had the money, but he didn't want to help. Such display of wickedness. Her son George was their own blood, their family. She wondered how wicked some people could be. She decided not to come back there because she was sure they would be of no help. She was very sad. She didn't know what else to do. She couldn't let her son die. God forbid, not in this world or the next, she thought. She must do something about it. She must take, even if it was drastic measures. She reached the hospital where her son was admitted. The hospital was a big one, although it was private. As she was entering, there was an emergency case. Probably a motor accident, she thought. The victim had one broken arm and leg. There was blood everywhere. He was brought in an ambulance. Some people there were sobbing loudly. The nurses had already come out with a stretcher to take him in. Amy watched. The hospital was a sad place. People died every day. She imagined her own son dying. She shook the thought out of her head. It wasn't going to happen because she must do something. She entered into the hospital. She greeted the nurse at the reception. She greeted the doctors she met in the hallway on the way to her son's ward. She had stayed in the hospital with her son for about a week and a half now, and she had become quite familiar with most of the hospital staff. She entered her son's room. He smiled at her. The smile looked stressed. It looked like he was forcing himself to smile at her. George knew what his mother has been suffering. Although she didn't tell him about the doctor's verdict, he knew there was something big involved. She didn't tell him so that he wouldn't have to worry. But all the same, he worried for his mother. He knew she had no money. He wished there was a way he could help her. He wished he could just be well and be strong for her. He had prolonged telling her about the sickness because he didn't want to add to her worries. She already worked too hard. Finally, the sickness had to show itself. He couldn't hide it any longer. As he smiled at her when she entered the room, she smiled back, trying to pretend all was well. She was a strong woman, he thought. She came and sat down close to him. She squeezed his hand. Are you okay? Do you feel pains anywhere? She asked in concern. Yes, Mummy, I'm okay, George said, trying to give his best smile, although he was dying in pain inside. Amy knew he was lying. She imagined the kind of pain he was feeling. She felt very sorry. She felt sorry that she couldn't do anything. She felt sorry that she gave birth to her son and couldn't even help him when he was in need. She blamed herself for everything.